Morning, everyone. I'm going to share a quick video reviewing a class that I took a couple of months ago. As I mentioned in the last couple of videos, I've been on a bit of a training kick and thinking about tactics, techniques, procedures. And a friend of mine, Alfred Felker, with strategic self-reliance, responded to one of my Facebook posts, and I had the opportunity to take a class with him a few months ago. I guess it was last summer. It's been a few months. Yeah, it was towards the end of last summer, I think. And so I just wanted to. The thought crossed my mind that I hadn't done any sort of review of the class that I took with him, so I want to talk about that for a minute and provide some of my perspective. As I've mentioned before, that wasn't the first. This wasn't the first time that I've participated in firearms training. Right, I've been through the state-sponsored Utah Department of Corrections Firearms Training Academy. I've been through Front Sight, the Front Sight 4-day defensive handgun class, and I did very well in both of those. I was one of the top two shooters. We tied for the UDC pistol qualification. And at Front Sight, I graduated. I think they call it distinguished, right, which is the top tier or whatever, right? So it wasn't the first time I've been through training, but it was different than either of those two experiences. So I signed up to attend. I think he calls it like the tactical handgun class, and if I got that wrong, Alfred, I'm sorry. But I believe it's called his tactical handgun class. So he came highly recommended from a few of my other friends here in West Tennessee. And so I went down on the day of our training to Henderson to go train with him. Prior to the training, he contacted me and encouraged me to see if I could get some other people to attend the class with me. I put some feelers out, but as he and I both discussed, a lot of times people are a lot more, they like to talk the talk, but they don't like to walk the walk, right? They don't want to put in the work. They don't want to put in the effort. And so it was just me. And he was able to find another student to attend. And that was the student's first firearms training course. So before I get into the details of the material itself, I'll start off by saying that I think for bang for your buck, it's really hard to find. In fact, you aren't going to find another instructor and another course that provides as much value or as much attention as he did. Okay, I think my tuition was like $200, and I may have gone through 50 or 100 rounds. Okay. There's a lot of gun schools out there that will, first of all, charge like 3 or 4 times that, and secondly, ask you to bring like a case of ammo for a 4-day or even a 2-day class, and that's just ridiculous. Okay, at some point it becomes what do some people call it, like range masturbation, right? Like you're just shooting, but not really to learn. There's a lot that you can learn without dumping lead down range. And if that makes you feel good, then whatever, I guess that's your thing. But if you're there to learn, you don't need to, blow through 1,000 rounds of ammo in a 4-day class to learn. Okay. And so as far as affordability goes, it was really affordable. On top of that, there were only 2 of us in the class. And that's pretty significant, right? That means I had 1 instructor for every 2 students. You can't say that of almost anywhere else, especially not a credentialed, because he's credentialed, class taught by an experienced person. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, he's got LE background, and he's been there, done that, right? So you're not going to find another instructor and another class that's going to give you that level of expertise in the instructor and that degree of personal attention for the instruction. All right. So hands down, it is fantastic. Okay. The class was interesting. And it included, aside from the shooting portion, he included a stop the bleed class. All right. So again, as far as value is concerned, right? I'm getting instruction, and it wasn't just like a 2 hour class either. Keep in mind, I think it turned out to be 4 or 6 hours long. Okay, 4 or 6 hours, closer to the 6 hour mark of shooting, or of tactical training, if you will, of fighting training, and a stop the bleed class for like $200. You can't beat that, right? So absolutely great value as far as I'm concerned. When it came to the weapons training, okay, putting myself in his shoes, in Alfred's shoes, he had a problem. Okay, he had one novice shooter who had never been through any training at all, and he had one experienced shooter, myself, who had. Okay, and so he had to manage that. So for the first little bit, we spent some time catching the other shooter up, and Alfred was really good about. I got the impression, anyhow. Okay, that he has his opinions and his preferences with techniques. Okay, how to perform a speed reload, how to draw, how to align your sights, how to shoot, and so he imparted those things to us. But I got the impression that he was less worried about the particulars of the technique that I chose, at least for me, and more worried about the tactics, right? Which I appreciated. I've mentioned in a previous video or two that, having been through those other classes that I've been through, and having shot, for as long as I've been shooting, I have some preferences that I've developed, and I'm not against doing things the way that an instructor prefers, as a deference to the instructor, right? He has ways he wants to do it. I'll do it the way that he says. But but Alfred didn't ask that of me, right? Which I really appreciated. He basically said, well, this is the way that we do it, and if that way works for you, then fine. And I definitely appreciated that from him. And he sort of engaged me to help instruct. I don't know if I want to put myself that far forward, but he used me as a sounding board, and sometimes would ask questions to help me prompt the other shooter as he learned some of the basics. Because again, he'd never been through formal training on like how to draw, how to proper trigger control, proper sight alignment, magazine changes, malfunction drills, and that sort of thing. So that was good, and he managed to bring him up to speed fairly quickly. It was obviously introductory for him. So, but we got quickly on to what I'm going to call the meat and potatoes of the class, the more functional things, right? He didn't spend very much time on those static range tasks. Okay, very quickly he incorporated movement into them. All right, so for example, shortly after we had gone through how to handle a malfunction and how to change a magazine, the next thing was, okay, start here, and then conduct your reload while you move to another position of cover, right? So that started incorporating some movement into the techniques that we were working on. Okay. It was the class was primarily focused on the skills that I think are necessary for most civilian gunfights. All right. It was focused on close range, right? 3 to 7 yards. Although we did take some shots out to like 15 and further. We practiced shooting from we practiced getting off of the X, right? So from a standing position on a go signal, moving while drawing and putting rounds on the target. Okay, we practice, and both going to the left and to the right. I think we practiced going backwards. I don't remember exactly all the directions that we practiced, but we practiced moving in multiple directions. We practiced shooting from unconventional positions, like laying down on our side, right? On either side, we practiced laying down on our backs and putting rounds on target. We practiced shooting. We talked about the basics of using cover and shooting around cover. We talked a little bit about moving through thresholds and doorways and that sort of thing. Again, obviously, this sort of introductory class wasn't time to get into the details of CQB or again moving into a room, but just some of the basics, right? Um, and so that was sort of the live fire part of it. The other thing about the class is that it was, with the exception of the very first sort of familiarization, this is how you align your sights, this is how you draw, blah blah blah. Aside from that, it was entirely point shooting. So we taped up our sights, we put something over my red dot. Now, that is something. I'll take a moment to talk a little bit about point shooting. I believe, and again, Alfred can correct me if I'm wrong, that he's a pretty big proponent of point shooting in general, and and so I hadn't ever taken a class that was specific to point shooting. My experience prior to that is as follows. Number one, in the other courses that I'd taken, we did practice some unsighted fire for really close shooting. So, shooting from a position of retention, for example. Okay. Number two, I never really told anyone this in either of those other classes. So I guess it's between, I'm letting it out now. I don't know. I was going to say it's between us, but it's for the world now. Growing up, and I've mentioned this before, I grew up playing paintball. Okay. And in paintball, you point shoot. There's really no sights. You point shoot. And, at distance, obviously you have to arc the ball so that it'll hit what you're aiming at. But really, within 15 yards or so, you point shoot. Like, you just bring it up. You bring up the gun, the paintball gun, and then you shoot your rounds, right? And people will walk the rounds into the target if they're off or whatever. But if you're experienced and you know what you're doing, then the gun is almost like an extension of you, right? So you don't have to think about, adjusting the arc or whatever. You just bring it up just like you would point your finger at a target, and then bang, and it hits. And so when I went through the academies that I went through, at really close range, and when I say really close, I mean, 357 yards, I wasn't using my sights anyways. Now, I never told anyone that, even though my instructors in those classes were very, sight picture, sight picture, sight picture. I didn't need them. And Alfred, of course, teaches point shooting, and so he embraces that. Okay, it's the first time that I'd ever been through a class where it was taught as a technique. And I hadn't also ever tried point shooting at greater distances, so my takeaway from that, okay, was that point shooting is as useful as I sort of thought it might be, and as my unqualified and unconfirmed experience indicated that it would be. All right, which is that at 357 yards, especially if you're reacting to a threat, like you're drawing because a threat just presented itself, which oftentimes will be the case in self-defense, and especially if you're moving while you're shooting, it's sufficient to align the weapon with your target, right? Using point shooting. You might use a very rough, Gabe Suarez also teaches point shooting under some circumstances with Suarez tactics. And he'll talk about metal on meat or meat on metal, right? Where back of the gun is on the target and press that trigger away, man. Go. So it was useful for sure at those distances. He had us back up even further. I want to say it was 15 or 20 yards and try there. And what I found is that starts breaking down. For me, anyhow. I'm sure that someone who point shoots a lot would be able to, get good hits on the parts of the body we want to hit, right? The upper thoracic cavity and the cranioocular cavity here. On a threat at distance, at up to 15 or greater yards, maybe, with point shooting. But I couldn't do that. That wasn't something that I can do, and to me, that's where I would move to using my sights more. All right. It also confirmed for me that if I'm in a situation where I need precision and I'm closer for some reason, then that's where my sights would come in hand too. So I wouldn't point shoot, right, to take a hostage shot, right? If someone's holding my child, I'm not going to point shoot. If I need to point shoot because all I have is a foot to hit under a car, I'm not going to point shoot that. I use my sights for that. But aside from those uses at closer range, The class confirmed for me that, and I feel like kind of taught me, right? Formally taught me that point shooting can definitely do the job, you know, 3, 5, 7 yards. All right. Um, so that concluded the live fire section of the class, and then we moved on to force on force, which is also really cool because we're talking about one class here that got us force on force too, right? And stop the bleed. So we did a couple of different things with the force on force. I brought my airsoft pistol. Alfred had an airsoft pistol that the other student used. So the first is that the first exercise we did was having us both start sort of at opposite ends of the range, and halfway down the range, off the range, there is a classroom building, and so we had to move to each other and engage, and whoever wins wins, right? So and oftentimes that ended up with us working around the building, right? So we got to implement some of the tactics that we had just learned and to validate them against each other. Again, I'm going to say that my experience, I think that there's value in, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I think that it was a really valuable exercise. Okay, I'll start off with that. It was a really valuable exercise to go and take what we had just learned, and then apply it through the force on force activity. I also think that that exercise reinforced for me the value of participating in martial games. And I also am aware, I think, that Alfred isn't a huge proponent of those kinds of things, and that's okay. But the reason that I say that is because when it came time for me to move to cover, to time and select how I'm using my cover and where I'm coming out, and varying my, where I'm using my coming out from my cover, and taking shots and that sort of thing. Those are all things that I had practiced before through those games, and it was not my first time doing it. And it's not even like I'd only done that through the context of classes. I'd done it for years and years and years through context of all those games. Okay. There's another aspect of all of that that's kind of hard for me to articulate. The best way I can put it is timing, right? When you're behind cover in a position, and you're shooting and exchanging with this other person in another position, and they duck behind cover, there's a timing component of deciding, do I stay here and continue to wait for them to move, or do I move to another position of cover where they're not expecting me, or do I change? And understanding which of those things to do, and then understanding the timing of making the movement and getting into cover and and all of that is sort of something that it's a feel thing to me. Okay, it goes away from like the science of self-defense and more into the art of self-defense, where it's like it's not something that can be taught. That feel is not something that can be taught. It's a timing thing that you have to feel and you have to figure out. Okay, and that's something that I am familiar with and have figured out because I've done it so much. Right. So it was a really valuable exercise to me. Again, because it was formal instruction using force on force, which I hadn't done, and it was somewhat validating of some of the other experiences that I'd had. And finally, we went to a third component, if you will, which was we were placed facing each other, within almost arm's reach, and we were told, okay, you have to kill the other guy. And so when he said that, I was like, okay, should I draw and shoot him, or is he supposed to draw? And he was like, I don't care, whatever you think's going to work best. So that was a really good exercise, and really the way that he did it, where he sort of just let us try what we wanted to, let us come to our own conclusions. which he knew what conclusions we were going to come to, right? He knew where this was going to go. And what we found was that when you're that close to someone, you can't draw fast enough to not get shot. Okay? If you both go for your guns, you're both getting shot. We also learned that it's really hard to stuff a draw. And so going back to some of the other training I've had, you'd think maybe this is something that I've already done before. Nope. Even going to the state-sponsored training, you know what? We didn't do 1 ounce of force on force. Not one bit. We didn't, at no point in that training was I ever told, stop this person from taking your gun. We practiced retention, but we didn't practice it in the context of a fight like that. Okay? And so it was really valuable to me to be fully hands-on, right? And again, I think that it was illuminating to me because I learned what you can and really can't do even that close, all right? And it got to where, and again, I'll say that it also showed the value of having some prior training. The only martial arts I've ever done was in the academy. And so, they do ground tactics, they do some jiu-jitsu based stuff, and then some, I guess, judo based, like arm bars and wrist locks and that sort of thing. But, a more basic aspect of that whole martial training, if you will, in the academy was the idea of understanding how to move your center of balance and get yourself low and, use hip movement to your advantage. The other guy didn't have any of that training. Okay? Even though it was a very long time ago for me. And so when we did end up in a tussle, I usually had a pretty good advantage. All right, I knew how to do a hip throw on him. I knew how to get into the mount. I knew how to lock up his arm, and so because of that, and I knew how to twist the gun out of his hand, and so because of that, I kind of did fairly well in that part of the exercise. Now I'm sure that if the other training person, my training partner, was more experienced in martial arts than I probably would have been in trouble, right? Or had much more difficulty. I have no doubt about that. And keep in mind, we weren't delivering strikes, right? We weren't delivering blows. I didn't have to worry about him choking me. As I've mentioned before, there are certain aspects of training that just won't represent a fight because it's training a particular skill set. And so that's one of those things that obviously in this case, we weren't training those skill sets. Nevertheless, it was really useful and valuable training. One other thing we did during the live fire portion is we practiced moving to and from cover, right? So we would start at the back of the range, and then he had some positions that I think he labeled them. He didn't label them, but he told us, this is position A, that one's B, this one's C, this one's C. And then he would call out a position, we'd move to it, and then engage targets. And then he'd call out a different position, we'd have to move back and engage targets, and so on and so forth. And he had a little obstacle course that we got to run and do as well. All of that in, I want to say 6 hours for, again, like $200. Very high value, very concentrated, no bull, no time wasted training. It was concentrated and focused on learning and then implementing those things immediately. And I thought it was a really, really valuable. And so if someone watching this video is wondering what the training is like with strategic self-reliance, or what that class is like, and if it's worth it, the answer is it is great training. It is highly concentrated training. It is personalized training, and it's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it. I have a home defense consultation set up with Alfred sometime in the next few months. He's going to come by, and that's one of the things he does is he'll walk through, the best tactics and techniques to use in your home and ways to harden your home. And so I think that's going to be very high value to me as well. At any rate, I hope this has been helpful. Alfred, thank you very much for the class that you put on with us. I look forward to training more with you in the future. If anyone has any questions or comments, please put them down in the comments below, or reach out to Strategic Self-Reliance. You can find them on Facebook. They have a website, and they'll get with you. If you're looking for any equipment, if you need any soft goods or hard goods, need some budget-priced optics, budget-priced AR uppers, get a hold of me. Let me know. I've got stuff in stock right now. We'll get you hooked up, and then get out there and use it, because it's just going to sit here and gather dust if you don't. Talk to you guys another time. Thanks.